Saga, you may please start.
Good evening, everyone. This is the 37th online monthly guest lecture organized by the research scholars at School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, Goa University. Title of today's talk, Towards a Metaphysical Anthropology, will be delivered by Professor Predrag Cicovacki. Just a quick announcement before the talk. This online talk is being recorded along with the content present in the chat box. Participants are requested to kindly turn off their microphones during the talk, and after the talk there will be a Q&A session. Now, for the welcome address, may I invite Diksha to kindly continue.
Thank you, Sagar. So, welcome everyone. It is my privilege to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this 37 monthly online guest lecture organized by research scholars at our school. We are truly honored to have with us Professor Predrag Cicovacki as our distinguished speaker for today. Professor Predrag is a professor emeritus at the Department of Philosophy at the College of Holy Cross, Worcester, Massachusetts, USA, and senior research fellow at the University of Cambridge. He's the author of 13 books, among which are Gandhi's Footprints, Barefoot in Benares, God, Man, and Tolstoy, and The Meaning of Life, A Quick Immersion. In the 2012 to 13 academic year, Professor Cicovacki was a recipient of the Fulbright Nehru Fellowship of the American and Indian governments for a study and research project in India. He's currently working on a 4-book project, Personality, Interactions, Values, and Transcendence, that should serve as a foundation of metaphysical anthropology. I also take this opportunity to warmly welcome Dean of SSPIS. A heartfelt welcome to all the faculty members at Goa University, our research scholars and students, and all our participants, faculty, students, and others joining us from within and outside Goa University. Without further ado, let us now proceed to today's much-awaited talk. I invite Professor Predrag to take the virtual stage. Professor Predrag, over to you.
All right, I'm not sure what I can do.
Professor Predrag, you can
Share.
we can hear you. You can deliver the talk. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. First of all, let me say that it's a pleasure to be with you today. I wish we are together in Goa in person, but maybe at some other time. When I was in India, and it was a real pleasure, and I definitely would be very, very happy to be able to visit Goa again. All good stories start with the line, once upon a time. So since I'm hoping to give you one good story today, I will also start with the sentence, once upon a time. Once upon a time, I was a first-year student of philosophy at the University of Belgrade, which is now in Serbia, and it used to be in Yugoslavia at that time. And one of the classes that I had over there as a first-year student was a 1-year-long course on the great Greek philosopher Plato, one of the 3 or 4 most important Western philosophers. And the class on Plato happened to be the very first class that I had as an undergraduate student. So our professor walked in the class, big classroom, maybe 100, 120 students. A professor was properly dressed, not like me, jacket and a tie, very serious old professor, and started speaking in a deep and steady voice. And what he said at the beginning of that course, in my very first philosophy class, what he said in the first couple of sentences, I still remember to this day, and I will try to reproduce that for you in my own words. So he said something like this. He said, every great philosopher, every great system of thought is motivated by one great question, one disturbing single question. And in the course of this academic year, our task would be to study Plato and find out, if we can, what that one question was for Plato. That's what he said. That's how he opened the class. And I was stunned. I lost track of space and time. I think I missed the next several sentences that he said because I had to think about what he just said. It was so impressive. It was so different. Remember, I'm a first-year student. I come from a high school. And what your teachers want you in high school is to remember some lesson and reproduce it in class for grade. Nobody asks you, do you really understand what you're saying? Nobody asks you, what was the question that motivates that historical lesson or philosophy lesson or biology lesson? You just have to memorize it, you just have to learn it, and you have to reproduce it. And in the very first philosophy class, my professor opened for me and for other students who were there a totally new way of learning, a totally new way of thinking, focusing on the question, the art of questioning, the art of posing questions, the art of struggling with the question. Let me tell you this, that was not a rhetorical device. I think that my professor was then trying to write a book on Plato, and that he himself was trying to figure out what that question was for Plato. Since he never published the book of Plato, I think that it's not just my memory that fails me, that we never came up with the answer to what that question is. I think our professor did not succeed as well. But he tried and we tried. And that's what philosophy is more about than finding an answer, resolving the puzzle, coming up with a definitive truth that can only be refused in the next book, in the next philosophy article, and so on. So the art of questioning, the art of searching for deep, disturbing questions that change your life around, that twist your life around, that make you look at life, at what you do, at how you want to live in a very different way. I'll now jump about 35, 40 years ahead to the time a couple of years ago when I started thinking about retiring from teaching. I was a professor, as somebody said in the introduction, at the College of the Holy Cross for 32 years, and I was teaching at different places across the world, including India. And after COVID, everything changed, and I realized it's time for me to remove myself from the university, from teaching, from active teaching. But I had to make a plan. What am I going to do after I retire? So the last 3 years, or 2 years, 2.5 years after COVID, I started looking at everything I did as a philosopher from that very first class. I started reviewing my notebooks. I started reviewing the books that I read. I started trying to sum up the question. I started looking for the question that was driving me for 40 years to try to see what that question is for me. Before I tell you what that question is for me, let me go back to that first class on Plato again. Obviously, when you study Plato, you talk about Socrates a lot, major Western philosopher, in some ways, maybe the most important Western philosopher, even though somebody who did not write anything, who did not leave us a single book, a single line. But there are very valuable lessons to learn from Socrates. And I will share with you now 2 lessons that I learned from Socrates in that first year of my studies that are still with me and that very much impacted me, my search for that one question and my understanding of that one question that motivated me all these years and still does. As you may know, some of you who studied Plato and Socrates, Plato is constantly struggling with the question of virtue, as they call it. Virtue. What is courage? What is wisdom? What is moderation? What is piety? All these questions that Socrates is asking over and over and over again. Why was Socrates asking that question? And what is he asking for? Well, as you know, the Greeks were a very developed culture that was driven towards perfection, striving toward perfection, being the best warrior you could be, like Achilles that Homer described in the Iliad, becoming the most successful athlete that will win the Olympic Games and the eternal glory for himself and his family and his country. So the Greeks were driven toward perfection. And Socrates realized that there's only one kind of perfection that we should be interested in. Not how to become perfect as a warrior, or how to become perfect as a teacher, or even perfect as a shoemaker, or whatever it happened to be our profession, but how to be perfect, or better yet, how to be as good as possible as a human being. What does it mean to be excellent, not as a warrior, not as a teacher, not as a shoemaker, but as a human being? That's the question. That's the question that was driving Socrates. So Socrates refused to talk about the stars and the sky and the origin of the universe. And he said, all I want to understand is what makes me be a good human being? What makes me be as good human being as possible? There's one more lesson that I learned from Socrates at that time that stayed with me for the rest of my life. As I mentioned, the Greeks were great competitors. They were the ones who introduced the Olympic Games. And you may not know, when they had the Olympic Games, Greece was not one country. It was similarly like India, right? It was a lot of small little city-states, countries, Maharaja here, they didn't have Maharajas, but like in India, there's this place here with its own army and so on. And they were constantly fighting. But during the Olympic Games, all the wars, all the fightings would stop, and everybody would come and try to compete without any weapons, without any animosity, and try to establish who's the best among the best, to compete against others in running, in throwing a javelin, in wrestling, and so on. And Socrates made one very important discovery, or made one very important twist or turn. Socrates says, what we have to do, what philosophy is really about, is not competing against others, but competing against ourselves. The real devil is not out there. The real devil is in us. The problem is always in us. So don't try to be better than others. Try to be better than the worst part in you, the part that's pulling you down, that's part that's making you envious, greedy, that's making you not helpful and sympathetic toward your neighbor, but always thinking, oh, I'm doing better than he is. I have more money than he does. I've accomplished more things in life than my neighbor did. Don't compete against your neighbor, compete against yourself. Are you on a way to become the best person you could be? Never mind what your neighbors do and how they live. Just focus on yourself and look at yourself. These kind of questions, these kind of thoughts that fascinated me when I was 18, 19 years old, stayed with me for the rest of my life. Why? Because essentially I realized then, even though I was not fully aware of it and could not articulate that until many years later, that the main question that drives me is how to be the best human being I could be, how to become excellent or as good as possible as a human being. without competing against my neighbor, without competing against my wife, without competing against my colleagues, competing against myself, against my own laziness, against my own lack of discipline, against my own lack of faith, or anything else that may lower my qualities, that can pull me down and prevent me from being a better human being, the human being that I could be. It took me years before I could fully understand that. And let me also mention one episode that helped me in that process. Later in my studies at the University of Belgrade, I discovered and had to study a great philosopher, Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher who lived in the 18th century. I spent a lot of time studying Kant, and he became my favorite. And at one point, I discovered that Kant said in his lectures about logic, that there are only 4 philosophical questions, that everything reduces to these 4 philosophical questions. So one of these philosophical questions is, what can I know? What can I know? And he wrote the Critique of Pure Reason that answers the question about the nature of knowledge and the limits of knowledge. And the second philosophical question is, how ought I to behave? How ought I to live? How should I live? And he wrote the Critique of Practical Reason to answer that question. And then the third question is, what may I hope? What may I hope to happen after I die? What may I hope to happen while I'm still alive? And so on. And he wrote the third book. It's called The Critique of Judgment, or the critique of the faculty of judgment sometimes, to answer that question. But he says there's one more question. And that question is, what is man? What is a human being? And he said all other philosophical questions at the end focus on, return to, originate from that one fourth question. But interestingly enough, Kant never wrote a book to address that question. So think about this paradox for a while. This great philosopher, very prolific, who wrote so many books, he tells you there are these questions. Those are the most important questions. And the ultimate question, the most important question of all, is the question of what is man? And he never wrote a single book about that question. How puzzling. Later on, when I finished my undergraduate studies in Yugoslavia then, and went to the United States, I went explicitly with the intention of studying Kant's philosophy. And I went to study with one of the greatest Kant scholars of all time, Louis White Beck. And he became like my father. We had a relationship that you have in India that you call guru and shishya, that was much closer to that than the academic professor and the student. He became like my father. We spent so much time together. And because he was a great Kant scholar, I kept bugging him with that question. Why didn't Kant answer that question? And being a great professor that he was, he would turn back question to me and he says, let's try to think about it together. Let's try to answer that question together. He was not a professor that would give you a recipe, that would give you a formula, that would give you an answer that you have to memorize. He was pushing you to, stimulating you to try to come up with your own question to that answer. When I pressed him, and we knew each other, and we spent a lot of time together in a course of 12 years, his best answer was that, in a sense, Kant's entire opus, Kant's entire work, all of his books are an answer to that question. And I was more skeptical than my professor. And I came to believe that Kant, as a matter of fact, did not know how to answer that question. The question eluded him. It was one question that even the great philosopher Kant could not answer. I hope that you see slowly how I'm making a bridge toward the topic of today's talk, metaphysical anthropology. Because the question about man, by man I mean both male and female, I mean any human being, young or old, Indian or European or American, religious or non-religious, rich or poor, right? So when I say man, I mean a human being, but it's easier to say man. So Kant posed the question, what is man? But I think part of his problem is that he did not set the question right. He did not ask the right question. What is man? What is this? This is a pencil. This is a pen, pencil. What is this? This is a piece of paper. But we ask the what question about things, about objects. But human being, our manhood, our humanity is not an object among other objects. It's of a different kind. We're not looking for what we are made of biologically, what kind of substance we are made of, as philosophers like to say, matter or the spirit or something else. A better way to ask that question was asked a long time ago by another great philosopher and theologian, St. Augustine, who asked many, many centuries ago, who is man? Not what is man, but who is man? Who are we? Do we know each other? Do we understand our own humanity? Do we understand what our life's all about? So for me, that's what philosophy is about, or better to put it in a different way. That's the philosophical question that's been driving me for the past 40 years, and that will probably continue to drive me for as long as I live. What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to live like a human being? But that's still a vague question. That's still a very general question. So this metaphysical, let's put it this way. The science, the discipline, the intellectual discipline that studies humanity, that studies what it means to be a human being, is called anthropology. But I call my project metaphysical anthropology, not just anthropology, but metaphysical anthropology. Why? What's different? Some of you, not professors, but students, may not be familiar with that word, metaphysics, a strange word that non-philosophers think, what does that mean? I can never understand. What is it that philosophers talk about when they talk about metaphysics? Well, it's a Greek word. It's a combination of two Greek words. One is physis, which means nature, which means the natural world, the world that we observe, the world we can touch and sense and smell. And the first part of that word, metaphysics, is a vague word. It's a prefix that means beyond and above and under, which suggests that the world as we see it is not the whole world. The world is not exhausted by empirical facts. The world is not exhausted by what the senses tell us. There's much more to the world. And what's truly essential about the world may be hidden from our eyes and hidden from our touch and hidden from our ears. And we have to find what it is. So by calling my project metaphysical anthropology, I'm suggesting that the natural sciences and the social sciences, which examine the fact about our humanity, are not capable of giving us or putting us in a position to answer the question, what does it mean to live like a human being? How should a human being live? We need more. We need both with whatever we can learn from experience and whatever our thinking can penetrate into and gather for us in a sense of a deep insight of the world, of the aspect of the world that's not visible, that's not empirical. That roughly explains the title. I will say more about it. What I'm going to do now is read and comment slowly the document that I sent to some of you that I hope you have, that you can follow easier if I go through it, and I'll make stops and make some explanations, especially for students. So the project of metaphysical anthropology. Summoned into life without sufficient guidance, human beings are destined to seek and struggle. In doing so, we can turn toward things high or those low. Most frequently, we embrace both. Our natural impulses are there to guide us, but only to a point. At that threshold, we must decide whether to ennoble those impulses or overcome them, suppress them, control them, compress them, reject them. Since our civilizational drive has been pushing us toward the latter option for centuries, suppress the drive, suppress the instinct, suppress the nature. Since our civilizational drive has been pushing us toward the latter option for centuries, it's hard not to notice that our lives have become not only hastily accelerated, but also increasingly alienated from the natural world. A closely related yet even more pressing issue is that there are deepening contradictions at the very heart of our human lives, as we neither seem to know who we are, what we want, and where we are going. In our restlessness and disorientation, combined with our advanced ability to manufacture and mutilate nature and each other, we have become a problem. Human beings are a problem. We are a danger not only to ourselves, but also to other forms of life on this planet. And if that's really so, is human life worth preserving? Would not this world be a better place without human beings who pollute and destroy and use and abuse and don't bring anything to Mother Nature but poison it? What can validate human existence in light of such inner contradictions and destructive tendencies? So here I shift the question toward, why are we here? Is our existence justified? We behave like we are the lords of the world. We are gods of some kind with the technology that we have. But look what we are doing to each other and to Mother Nature. I'm not primarily wondering about preserving our existence, but our humanity. My central concern is not how to survive, but how to flourish. These reflections about what makes us different from animals, from things, and what makes our existence worth preserving are the central concerns of this project, which I called Metaphysical Anthropology. So what makes us different? And what makes our existence worth preserving? It is a normative project, not a descriptive project. When you study anthropology, the science that's called anthropology, it's a descriptive project. People in India, people in Goa live in this way. People in Tamil Nadu live in a different way. Or they have similar customs, but they have different customs too. Right? Pure description, without saying one is better than the other. But philosophy and the metaphysical anthropology that I'm looking for is a normative project. It should tell us how to live, how we should live and how we shouldn't live, not just describe. It's a normative project that examines when we are at our best and at our worst. It probes into the meaning of the entire human enterprise. What animates us the most? What makes us the most alive? And what deadens us? What makes us dead even though we are alive? Spiritually dead, psychologically dead, like pieces of furniture, like machines. What is man's greatest fear? And can it be overcome without comforting illusions and noble lies? What do we fear the most? Death? Losing our dignity? Losing the money? What do we fear the most? And can we overcome those fears honestly, truthfully, without some illusions, without some lies? What is our most cherished dream and ambition? What is the best we can be as human beings? What is the highest we can accomplish? And then, maybe the hardest question of all, what is the hardest task we face as human beings? So those are the questions that I want to address in these 4 book projects. Very difficult questions, the most difficult questions I could come up with. To compress these and related questions into one, we can ask, how good can man be when he dedicates himself to the noblest and the highest, toward becoming the most humane he could be? In moving toward the answers, in going beyond the questions, I have come to believe that the need for truth is one of the most elementary human needs. The truth that we need is not necessarily the one with a capital T. That's how we philosophers call the eternal, unchanging truth that's always and forever the same. We don't necessarily need that. The truth can be dynamic and pluralistic, but it must be based on the natural orders of rhythm and rightness. Rhythm, natural rhythm, and rightness seem to be somehow knotted, like a knot, into the very fabric of reality. And while nature and its orders should not have the last word, they must have the first. We cannot turn against nature. We cannot abandon nature. Nature has the first word, but not the last. The last belongs to culture, spirituality, philosophy, religion, or something else, but not to nature. Nature is the base. Nature is the starting point, which we always have to respect and to which we have to return. But the last word belongs to something else, to somebody else. Emerging from this insight is a great challenge, which can be summarized as a question. Can we absorb and transform the energies of nature without killing them off? So much of our cultivated world consists of artifacts and substitutes, and so much of our common life requires concealments and compromises that we struggle to recognize those orders of rhythm and rightness, even though they are deposited in the very issue of which we are made. The greatest challenge to developing and sustaining our humanity may well consist in finding the right ratio between our commitment to truth and the need to compromise. When I was 18 and 19 years old, I was idealistic, and I believed that we can always speak the truth and we should always speak the truth. 40 years later, I realized that's not quite always possible, or that's not quite always good. Sometimes you need to lie. Sometimes you need to make a compromise. Sometimes. But the most difficult thing is to know when and to what extent. What is the right measure between telling the truth and pursuing the truth and finding a compromise? When and to what extent must we stick with the truth? And when and to what extent is a compromise necessary? So one of the most fundamental needs that we have is the need for truth. We need to pursue the truth. We need to be as truthful as possible. Our other most fundamental need is for love. To love and to be loved. To become and be human beings, we need others. An isolated individual would cease to be a personality. An isolated individual can be a human being, but is not a personality, is not a fully developed person. The will and intelligence are instrumental in creating socially acceptable masks. But love involves face-to-face encounter and helps us see who others are, and I can add, and who we are. In love, we learn more about ourselves and others than when we don't love, and when we don't know what love is. Love personalizes everything it loves. If I love my flower, I treat it like a person. If I love my cat, I treat it like a person. Love personalizes everything it loves, and opens a way toward the innermost understanding of what it loves. Lived experience and empathic, sympathetic understandings are the best paths toward knowing the truth of who we are, as well as the truth of those we care about most. Love's nature is even more complex and ambiguous than that of truth. Love is an emotion, a feeling for other human beings and other aspects of reality. But most importantly, it is a disposition to relate to others lovingly. So what I distinguish here is between love as a noun, love as a verb, to love somebody, and love as an adverb, to do something lovingly, to study something lovingly, to wash my dishes lovingly, to cook lovingly, to sweep and clean my room lovingly. There's a difference whether we do it lovingly, with passion, with emotion, with commitment, or whether we do it grudgingly. Oh, I have to study that philosophy again, that boring, stupid philosophy again, right? I have to wash the dishes. I'm such a great mind, and yet I have to waste my time and energy in washing the dishes, right? Whatever we do, we have to do lovingly. Love does not primarily deal with the push, as it is case with instinctual drive, but with the pull, with what appeals to us the most, with what we are drawn to, the truth included. Here I make a subtle criticism of Freud, Sigmund Freud, who has become enormously influential in the Western world. Freud understood love as a push, as a push from behind. Somebody is pushing me toward this woman to look for sex, to look for intimacy. And I'm talking about love that doesn't come from behind, but that stands in front of us and draws us toward itself. Love is an aspiration. Love is something that appeals to us and allures us to strive toward it. A very different conception of love. Love's nature is even more complex and ambiguous than that of truth. Sorry. We already read that passage, the next one. Despite the obvious differences between truth and love, there are also some fundamental similarities. Both are relational, a relation. One person loves another. One person is true to somebody, to himself or to somebody else, to his God, for instance. Being true to your God, that's a relation. Through its connection with the order, truth relates to what holds the world together. Truth is about what holds the world together, what holds the family together, what holds the university together, what holds the department together. Love, for its part, is about what brings us together and what moves the world. But truth and love are fundamentally different from the will and what is up to us. In the Western world, it has become all about voluntarism, about what I want and what I don't want. The will has become the main faculty in the Western philosophical thinking. What I want and what I don't want. And I want to say that the will is a secondary faculty. Why? Because the truth is what it is, whether I will it or not. Who I happen to love is not the question and the matter of my will. I fall in love with somebody or I love something like philosophy or I don't. That's not the question of the will. So a big part of my project would be to reduce the significance of the will and the intellect. I skipped a few sentences, but I'm looking at the very last sentence of this paragraph that's on your screen. As the lack of food and drink endangers our existence, the absence of truth and love is detrimental to our humanity. So truth is like food, and love is like drink. Food is something solid, and drink is something liquid. So as we need food, we need the truth. As we need drink, we need love, something that moves, something that goes through us, something that motivates us, something that animates us. Let's go to the next sentence, to the next page. So if you can move it, excellent. After years of wrestling with how to provide a suitable structure for an in-depth examination of our struggles with truth and love, or for this project of metaphysical anthropology, I have come to believe that we should organize this examination around 4 pillars of human existence: personality, interactions, values, and transcendence. Believe me, my list had at least 30 candidates, and I was adding some and reducing some and trying this and trying that. It's the years of searching that led me to these 4 that I will now explain. First in one sentence or 2 sentences, and then in a little bit more detail. Personality centers on the problem of identity. Who am I is the most simple question of identity, but a little bit more sophisticated question of identity is, how can we integrate a general humanity, the fact that we are all human beings, with our irreplaceable uniqueness, with another fact that I'm unlike any other person in the world and you are unlike any other person in the world. I'll explain that a little bit later. Interactions deal with the problem of community, with living together through exchanges and common rituals. How can we form communities that are not mere aggregates of people? So not just people who happen to be on the same street together, on the same bus together, in the same train together. I intentionally avoid the word society and use community. Community is dealing with people who have something in common, who share something. Society is a more complicated beast, and I have come to, over the number of years, to have a very negative views of societies. I think most societies, as we know of them, are mostly detrimental in allowing us and enabling us to become human beings. I think societies makes difficult for us to become human beings, good human beings. But we can talk about it a little bit later. Values is the third point. Values concern the problem of orientation. How do we find our way in the complex flow of reality? What is right and what is wrong? And how can we tell them apart? Fourth, transcendence. And for me, transcendence boils down not to God, and we'll talk about it as well, but to our commitment. What are our ultimate bonds? Or better yet, what do we hold as the most sacred? What is the most sacred to us? That's what transcendence is about. If I want to explain this in terms of gestures, personality would be like 2 sides of my personality, of me, the dark and the light, the general humanity and my uniqueness. Can I integrate them? Can I bring them to work together? Interaction is like this, me and you and me. How can we form a community, whether it's family, whether it's a couple, whether it's a department? Values is our hands go up towards something that's better, towards something that can guide us. And transcendence, our hands go together in that namaste word, namaste gesture, and we know that we greet the divine in others as we wanted the others to greet the divine in us. Okay, now I'll give an explanation, a little bit of an explanation of each 4 of these and how these 4 books are going to look like. I'm working on the first book. I have the draft of the first book. I have to go now to the second draft, but I'll summarize what all these books would look like. Before we go to that, there are 2 short passages. These 4 pillars provide the core of the novel project of metaphysical anthropology. It's not an attempt to establish a new philosophical discipline, but to outline a new paradigm of responsible and reflective, interactive and creative way of life. So philosophy for me is not a doctrine, it's a way of life. This is what I learned from Socrates. This is what Socrates did. It's a way of life. Metaphysical anthropology aims to find out not the truth about human beings, not the facts about human beings, but the truth of being human. We can do it only by trying to be humans ourselves, by trying to be better humans ourselves. The anthropological part of this project will deal with the issues of becoming a personality and on our interactions. The metaphysical part will primarily focus on the nature of values we pursue in our persistent quest for transcendence, as understood in terms of our deepest commitments. So let's now explain each of these pillars into more detail. The central issue in the first part of this project, entitled Personality, is to explain the transition from the life of the human animal to that of the human personality. Each one of us is a human animal, but not each one of us is a human personality. I take human personality to be an achievement, something significant, and that we have to make a significant effort and undergo a significant development before we begin a personality. We neither live in fully socially constructed or determined reality, nor are we isolated individuals free to do whatever we imagine or desire. Personality is a being in between, which can be understood in a preliminary way as being human in one's own way. Not just being human, but being human in my own way, in my unique way, in accordance with the gifts that gods have given me, or Mother Nature. This approach underscores both our common humanity and our individual uniqueness. Both have to be represented, both have to be integrated. It also suggests that while in some minimal sense, we are all persons just by living as and with human beings, developing personality is a task. It's a complex, difficult, and lifelong task. Not every person is equally developed. Some people have little personality, while some are far ahead in their personal development, even if such a task can never be fully completed. The advancement of personality is not directly accomplished by acting, but rather by what prepares the ground for acting. And I mentioned three conditions here: what we are honoring and affirming, our readiness to be accountable for our actions. Mature personalities, mature people are responsible, take responsibility for what they do. And three, our ability to integrate the dark impulses of our nature into one well-rounded personality. We have to find a way to integrate the darkness in us, the evil drives and evil impulses in us somehow into our personality. We cannot get rid of it. That's impossible. Since the ultimate goal of human life is not to do well, but to live well, the emphasis on personality makes us broaden our moral concerns toward the reconciliation of vitality and spirituality, of labor and love. It makes us focus on the integrity of life and its dignity, rather than on any single one of its multiple aspects. The ultimate challenges of this book project can be summed up in two complementary ways. First, since personality means being human in one's own way, we need to understand the cost of being, the price we have to pay for being who we are, not being what others want us to be, what our parents want us to be, what our society wants us to be, but being who we are. We have to pay the price for that. And also the cost of not being who we are, to forget about who we are in order to please others, in order to live our lives in accordance with some other people's plans. When the emphasis is put on the development of personality and its integrity and flourishing, the questions shift a bit as well. What exactly is gained by developing personality? And how and why is an integrated personality better off than someone with little personality? That's the project of the first book. The second part of the overall project of metaphysical anthropology will deal with interactions. Two basic metaphysical assumptions of this book project are that the views that, one, everything is ultimately one, that you find in many religious and philosophical traditions, and also the view that's dominating the Western thinking, that everything is ultimately individual, like individual atoms, are both inadequate because they claim too much. Both everything is one and everything is separate claim too much. In many aspects of reality, whether dealing with the relations of human beings or any other kind of entities, many relations fall in between these two extremes and deal with the cases when there is neither a full separation nor a complete overlap. Neither a full separation nor a complete overlap. This is the key aspect of interactive relations. Let me make a footnote here and mention one sentence by Erich Fromm, a famous psychologist. The book from which the sentence is taken is called The Art of Loving, a beautiful little book. At one point, Fromm says this: in love, two persons become one and yet remain two. Two persons become one and yet remain two. So there's a partial overlap. They have a lot they share. Love is holding them together, but neither one of them is fully lost. They still have the features, the parts of themselves, of their personality that are not shared with another person. They still can have their own secrets. They still can have different interests that the others doesn't have. In love, two become one and yet remain two. That's what interaction is about. That we both interact and yet remain separate and yet remain different. Okay, in natural science, it has long been recognized that interactions are the basic ways in which physical things relate to each other, molecules, atoms. But just as electrons interact with each other, so do human beings. I treat interactions not primarily as a category of thought, but as life dynamism. It stands against isolation, self-sufficiency, and black and white picture of life. Our lives consist neither in actions nor in reactions, but in responsiveness to the reciprocal effects that things that happen have on us in the natural and the human world. Studying interactions leads us to resist the temptation to fix things once and for all. It also makes us sensitive to the dimension of in-between among human beings and all other entities. We need to take interactions seriously because life is full of ambiguities, paradoxes, and antinomies, some of which cannot be resolved in an either-or manner, if at all. Personality emerges only in relation with others. It emerges only when it's possible to relate to other human beings in a way of personal relations, as I and thou, rather than I and it. And it is a thing that I can manipulate and use for my purpose. A thou is something I respect, I have reverence for. Those are the concepts by the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. Many relations that matter most to us as human beings, like those based on love and being true to someone or something, are precisely of that interactive nature. This interactive approach, with its focus on personal and intimate relations, also demands a new order of explanation, one in which reasons and meanings, rather than causes and effects, are sought in answer to the question, why? Why? We can live and develop as personalities only in an interactive dialogue with others, in which we must justify our choices and behavior to them, as we call upon them to justify their conduct in our eyes. The third part of this project will be focused on values. Well-developed and flourishing and individually and communally integrated personalities are grounded not so much on any definitive authority of the Vedas, of the sacred texts, for instance, but on aspirations. This is why values and the allure they have are so important for our lives. A value-free reality is a fiction endorsed by those who imagine that it is human beings who create values. This is the prevailing view in the West since the 17th century, that nature is value neutral. Human beings create values. We create whatever values suit us. That's how Americans still behave. And the rest of the world, that's how the British behaved when they were in India. It doesn't matter what you're Indian, that your India has much longer tradition than the British. When the British did not even exist, India had its own culture, deep culture and tradition. No, they can do whatever they want of India or the rest of the world. Values exist on their own as ideal beings, as Nikolai Hartmann, a German philosopher who lived between 1882 and 1950, argues. Values exist on their own, whether we recognize them and attempt to recognize them in our lives. Hartmann compared values with the starry sky above us. And sometimes we are blind and don't look at the skies that guide us, as they used to guide the sailors on an open sea for centuries. Or the night is cloudy and we cannot see the skies above, and we cannot see what values should guide our lives. What I'm primarily interested in is not instrumental values. Instrumental values are marked by the question, what is it good for? What is something good for? This pencil is good for writing, but it's not good as, well, maybe I can use it as a fork, but it's not what its intention is to be. Right? It's not good for eating. I can eat pencil, and if I don't get poisoned, I stay hungry. So instrumental values are good for something, but what I want to talk about, what I'm mostly interested in, what shapes us as human beings, are the values that are called intrinsic values. It's something that is good regardless of its use. Among such intrinsic values are justice, personal and brotherly love, dignity, trust, truthfulness, empathy, wisdom, beauty, sublimity. Beauty is useless. Beauty can be useless. And it's still beautiful to see a beautiful person, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful landscape. It just does something to us as human beings, even when it's practically useless. Our discernment of values and our value taste could vary greatly from one person to another, from one epoch to another. That's why so many people argue that values are always relative. Who's to say what's valuable and what's not? Who's to say what's good? So our discernment of values and our value taste could vary greatly. They need to be constantly cultivated, our value taste, our discernment. But even then, there are unavoidable value conflicts. Some values conflict because they cannot both be realized at the same time and in the same circumstances. At one point, I can either eat or study philosophy. Both are valuable, but I cannot do, well, I don't know, maybe the youngsters who are multitasking, they can do both things at the same time. But usually you have to sacrifice one value in order to accomplish another value. Most importantly, there are genuine value conflicts that emerge from the nature of values themselves. For instance, brotherly love can be very unjust. I do something to my brother because he's my brother. Even when he does something wrong, I protect my brother. And justice need not be loving at all. Justice can be very cruel. Most of our mature life consists in facing such value conflicts, and our practical approach is based on our navigation between our commitments to truth and love and the need to compromise. I'll skip the next paragraph because we're running a little bit out of time, and focus on transcendence. So we skip this, the structure, and go a little bit down. Excellent. The last and most important, most metaphysically oriented part of metaphysical anthropology will concern transcendence. The prefix trans, the Latin word trans, signifies reaching towards something that goes beyond its usual limits, connecting it with what is not necessarily or usually connected. I take transcendence, this word transcendence, to refer to the horizon of our world as the edge of the natural order. As such, it may serve as the point of intersection of the ordinary and the extraordinary, of the temporal with the timeless. The allure of transcendence, which human beings have always felt. There have been urged over transcendence in any known culture. Atheism is a relatively new phenomenon. The allure to transcendence should not lead us to lose ourselves in something bigger and more powerful, but rather to find ourselves in our proper place in the world. In reaching out toward the transcendent, we often go beyond the limits of reason and must rely on symbols, as in art and religious rituals. But we also connect with the transcendent through our deepest feelings, which reveal our ultimate commitments and our sense of the sacred. Our feelings are much more relevant for our bonds and for the transcendence than our intelligence, and definitely than our will. There are many notions of transcendence, both from the many world religions and from philosophy. Roger Scruton, the English philosopher who died in 1920, clarifies transcendence in terms of transcendental bonds. What bonds in the deepest possible way? They're natural bonds, like between a mother and a child, between two siblings, between lovers, that they're natural bonds, but he's talking about transcendental bonds. For him, they are non-transferable attachments marked by two features: a long-term social function and their lack of internal plasticity. They remain the same over time. These are not the matters that concerned with social contracts and conventions. Since the time of Thomas Hobbes and Rousseau, people in the West think that everything is a matter of a social contract, what we mutually agree to respect or not to respect. It's not a matter of our social contract, but of our trusting, what we trust the most intimately, the most deeply. Scruton argues that all obligations of love are like that. I will develop the socially interactive conception of transcendence by showing how the significance of transcendence consists in its double aspect. It refers both to what is separated from all things familiar, thus a need to reach out for it, and yet it is at work within everything, which allows us to be grounded. In different language, the transcendent is actually both transcendence is actually both transcendent and immanent. The Isha Upanishad is one good example where that connection is being made, but we can talk about it later. It allows us to feel, the transcendence allows us to feel that we are not strangers in this world, that we belong here. Furthermore, I will argue that as interaction is a precondition of meaning, transcendence is a precondition of truth, especially the truth concerning our inner calling. We are almost at the end, the last paragraph. This project of metaphysical anthropology is intended as a response to profound moral and spiritual disorientation of our age. Metaphysical anthropology must amplify rather than merely analyze, as analytic philosophy wants, or deconstruct, as postmodernism wants, the meaning of our place in reality. We have to amplify it. We make it bigger so we can see it better. We don't have to deconstruct anything. It has to help us understand how to orient ourselves toward the highest and noblest ideals of being human, rather than to continue one-sided to adopt to the actual. Finding the right measure between the real and the ideal, as well as between the individual and the general aspects of humanity, are our most difficult and yet centrally important tasks. Let me repeat that. This is what may be the most difficult thing in life: finding the right measure between the real and the ideal, between the individual and the general. Human beings both are and are not of central significance in the universe. There's a paradox. We both are very unique, in some ways central, and in some ways we are just the dust, like the rest of the dust in the universe. We can validate our presence in this world not only by developing a better sense of why we are here and what we should be doing with our lives, but also by connecting and measuring ourselves against something that is not human and immanent, the transcendent. We must recognize our calling and summon the courage to live following our deepest commitments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Now, may I invite Akash for moderating Q&A session?
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you so very much for this amazing talk. Now the session is open for question answers. Everyone can ask their question either by raising their hands or by writing down their question in the message section. I will read out the questions out to sir, or you can directly raise your hand, and accordingly I will take your name so that you can ask your question directly. Yes, sir, please you can go ahead with the question. So you need to unmute yourself, sir. Excuse me, sir. So you have to unmute yourself.
Good evening, Professor. How are you? Good. So after a long time, so I heard your well presentation. I just congratulations to you and the Department of Philosophy, University of Goa. You have just pointed out personality. So I know about the personality. What is the difference between anthropological personality and the personality of a philosophy and a psychology? Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. In anthropology, we take every human being to be a person, unless there's some kind of a birth defect, or unless there's a complete lack of intelligent abilities, and we're talking about some kind of a serious disease that prevents a person from functioning normally in a society. But everything is a person. So for us, the words in anthropology, words like human being and personality are synonymous.
Yes.
What I was trying to show in this project is that they are not synonymous, that human being is simply a human animal. And unfortunately, as we know, there are lots of people who sometimes, not due to any fault of their own, never really go beyond that level of human animal. They simply lack the opportunity. They live in terrible circumstances, and they never get the chance, and sometimes never get the inner impulse to try to develop themselves into something more than just an instinctually driven being, being who lives fully by instincts in the same way in which an animal lives. And that's why it's called a human animal. So personality has to be someone who has more developed sense of morally right and morally wrong, who has a sense of beauty, of what is beautiful, even though it's it's useless, who has a sense of spirituality, who has a sense of the possible presence of higher kind of beings, of the divine being, not just outside of us, but within us as well. So personality is something that is a higher stage of development of a human animal. This is something what we try to accomplish through education, through culture that begins with the family upbringing, and that we expect our society is main function is not just to sustain itself, but to enable young men and women to grow, to develop, to enrich the existence, so that the focus with personality is on the quality of life, not the sheer survival, not the sheer existence, but the quality of that life. And as we know, people, in terms of quality, people can live very different lives. Even the same individual, even the same person can have a very different quality of life in different periods of one's life. Sometimes the circumstances are terrible and difficult. Sometimes a person makes a mistake and has to pay a price for that mistake for years, for months. And that creates all kinds of obstacles. And then eventually, and hopefully, a better time comes. A person has learned enough from a mistake not to repeat the same mistake again, and comes to the next level, comes to a greater sense of responsibility towards his own actions, responsibility for others, a greater sense of appreciation of other human beings, greater sense of appreciation of our tradition, and so on. Does that answer your question, or would you need more answers?
Yes, sir, you can go ahead with your question, Mohammed, sir.
We don't hear you.
So you need to unmute.
Can I raise a question now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Not one question. I have two questions. One is about your claim that values stand on their own. They're intrinsic. It goes against the view that values come out of interactions between human beings. So one is an Indic concept of values, which says that values stand on their own. Another is a social concept of values, which say that through interactions, values come into being. If at all you stick to the point that values stand on their own, they are not socially created, how do you prove your point? That is one question. Another is with regard to the quest for moral height, which human beings seek in the context of your juxtaposition of deconstruction and transcendence. You say transcendence would make possible the moral height rather than deconstruction. Why can't it be otherwise? When you deconstruct whatever you have constructed, owing to your position in the world, maybe authority in the world, it may also take you to moral heights. You don't have to adhere to transcendence to reach moral heights. By deconstructing whatever notions you have or whatever relationship you have with the world, you can reach moral heights. These are the 2 points I would like to make by way of response to your lecture. It was a very good lecture. I enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with your second question, deconstruction versus transcendence. Okay, let me start with the second question. I think I agree with you to the point about deconstruction. I take deconstruction to be, the value of deconstruction to be this. In our world, there are many illusions, mistakes, what society imposes on us, what society wants us to believe is in many ways totally mistaken. People for centuries sometimes believe totally wrong things. The value of deconstruction can be in deconstructing those illusions, in showing those illusions to be indeed illusions, to be lies, to be just constructs that do not are based on reality. In that way, deconstructing can be liberating. It can help us see what is the case. So at least by helping us see what is not the case, what is a lie, it can bring us closer to the truth. But I still think that you need more than deconstruction, because usually the deconstruction just leaves the ruins of the old. You break down the building, but you need to build a new one. You break down one temple, but you need to build the true temple, the real temple, the temple that's not based on illusions, that's based on truth. And I think that's what transcendence is leading us to look at something that's beyond and bigger than we are, to look beyond just our individual interest and even our human interest, to try to see things both from our personal points of view and from a bigger picture, from a picture of humanity and even beyond humanity. So I think deconstruction is useful, but I don't think deconstruction can take us all the way. If you look at the French deconstructionist philosophy of the end of the 20th century and the 21st century, everything's in chaos. Everything's in disorientation. All the gods have fallen. All the gods have been broken down, but there's nothing standing. There's nothing to believe in. There's utter disorientation. That people are totally lost. People in the West are totally lost. The West is falling apart. The West has lost any sense of values and any sense of orientation. Let's move then to the first question. Do not values emerge in interactions? Do not values emerge through social contacts? Why do I say that values somehow exist on their own? Let me give you one example. There are many very corrupt societies. We can imagine a society in which virtually everybody's corrupt. Okay? There's no normal way to, or moral way to get things. You can be the best for the job, but the boss's cousin gets the job, or the boss or somebody else pays more for the job and gets the job, even though doesn't have good qualifications for the job, right? Does the value of truth or truthfulness still exist in that world? It does. That's the point. We still understand, even in the most corrupt world, that being truthful is a value. Even though nobody is actually truthful and everybody is actually lying and corrupt. Okay? I make a difference between values as they ideally exist. So ideally, we should all be truthful and honest and helpful to each other and so on. So there's one level, that's why Hartman calls values ideal beings. Ideally, there should be justice. Ideally, there should be truthfulness. Ideally, there should be sympathy among people and solidarity and so on. We all know that the real life is very different than that. So there's values as they ideally exist, and then there's the realization of these values, or what happens to these values when we try to make them present in our own lives, the social interactions. So ideal values and the actual values, the actual realization of values are two very different things, okay? And despite the fact that so much of our behavior is impacted by how people actually behave, we are the children of our time, as Hegel said, right? We are part of our societies. We cannot escape who we are, right? And nevertheless, there's something in us. There's some kind of intuition in us. There's some kind of an insight in us that understands that this is how things should not be, that things should be different than they are, that we should be striving. Maybe not we individually. Maybe we individually, we cannot change anything. What individual can change the whole society? What individual can change the culture of corruption? But we understand that this is not how things are. That's why I believe that values have an intrinsic things. When you look at beauty, for instance, much of the things that are presented as beauty now on TV, in magazines, social media, this is all vulgar. This is horrible. This is not beautiful at all, right? I don't know how it's in India. I haven't been there for the last couple of years. But for instance, in Europe, there's this big urge for women to enlarge their lips so they have artificially big lips. This is so vulgar. This is so ugly. And yet these poor women pay thousands of dollars to do that to themselves, thinking that they'll be more attractive, that they'll be more beautiful. Right? This is the socially prevailing concept of beauty. And yet this is beauty that's actually vulgar, that's much closer to ugliness, despite the fact that the social taste has been dominating and pushing these poor deluded women to do these things to themselves. Right? So there's a difference between what's socially valued and what should be valued ideally. And we understand both. We can see what's valued in every society, but we can also understand that there's something else that's beyond social constructs and social approval and so on, that's true in itself, that's valuable in itself. So I stand behind my
Yes, sir. We have one question in the chat box from Ms. Cindy De Silva. The question, I'll read out the question to you, sir. To what extent can metaphysical anthropology help us reconcile individuality with shared human universals?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Okay, help us reconcile individuality with shared human universe. Well, okay. Imagine, again, think about Socrates, who I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture. The Athenian society, so Socrates tried to live as good life as possible. He was an honest person. He participated in the social life of the city. When needed to go and join the army, he joined the army. He fought in war. But he was perceived in his society as annoying. He always asked these questions. He always made critical comments. So it came to the point that people who were in power wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to get rid of him. He was a nuisance, social nuisance. What should Socrates do? Should he make a compromise and say, I'm sorry, I should have followed the majority. I should have done what you would like me to do. I will keep quiet from now on. I will not criticize anybody. Or should he continue to live the same way that he lived before because he was convinced that he is doing a service to his city? He was doing the service to his city by, to use the expression of my colleague, by deconstructing the lies, the prevailing lies of the society in which he lived. He was sentenced to death. His friend Crito bribed the guards, and Socrates could escape to another city and live the rest of the life there, and he refused to go. He stood for what he believed in. Did it reconcile the individual with the society at that time? No. Socrates died. People who wanted to see him killed were happy, and they succeeded. But for centuries after, we use Socrates as a model of a good human being. We use Socrates as a model of human integrity. We use Socrates as that value that stands transcendent to what is the popular opinion and what the majority wants. And we look at Socrates as our guide rather than the opinion of the majority in terms of how Socrates and anybody else should behave. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Boina has raised her hand. Boina, please go ahead and ask your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Hi, Predrag, how are you? I was actually hoping that I will welcome you, but I'm not sure what happened. So I'm welcoming you now. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. And I was actually thinking, while there was the last question, something in me was questioning, and I would like to see with you, what do you think about that, about the destruction, the construction when you were talking about. So when you were mentioning that we need to deconstruct and then to build, okay, I am actually questioning what it means really to build anything new. As if we are building something new, it also again comes the question from where this is coming from, because we built all this where we are now. So this didn't came out of nowhere. It was built already. So somehow I'm a little worried in the sense of, if we deconstruct, which is needed, I totally agree. But if we again build it, and if we build it again, let's say I'm using this, what Krishnamurti is often using, we build it again from the mind, okay, from the thought. then we are raising again. We are rising, and we are coming to the same point where we were in some sense, or maybe similar. So, what do you think about just deconstruction without anything? If we just leave it and maybe stop putting an effort, because I'm not sure what the effort is actually doing. That's one thing. And second, that is very much related to the Western understanding. If it's this or it's that. Okay, so if we deconstruct, therefore we have to build. No, it's mostly that way. We are always in that dualism. If we deconstruct, then we rebuild, or something like that. But if we just do the deconstruction and stay there and see maybe what will happen, like, if we make a pause, if we make a break, because this system is what is making us in that perpetuum mobile. It actually asks us to deconstruct and then rebuild, and we are just rebuilding the same. So I believe maybe stopping is what will, after the construction, the stopping and first seeing where we are and what is happening can make some kind of a more point. Yes.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know Bojana, who just asked the question, she comes from Serbia, where I'm now, and where I'm from as well. And while Bojana was here in Serbia during the past 8 months or so, she participated in the social protests that are going on since November 1st of the last year. Almost every day, there are daily protests. And what those protesters want is to make the government responsible for its corruption, responsible for people who built the new train station that collapsed and killed 16 people, and so on. So Bojana participated in the effort to deconstruct the government of Serbia and deconstruct a socially poisonous environment that's pervading Serbia right now. Okay, now, even if the government falls down, which we expect to happen, would we not again build a government that's corrupt, but in a different way than maybe that's, or at least initially looking that it's not corrupt, but it will turn out to be as corrupt as this one that we're trying to bring down for the past 9 months? Likely so. This is what the history teaches us, right? Even this government that we're trying to bring down, I believe that initially had good intentions and was doing good things for the people, and gradually became more and more corrupt, more and more interested in its own interest, and neglected the people and the rest of the country. Here's the question for all of us to think about. Due to human limitations and what Krishnamurti warns us about and what history teaches us about, should we not just deconstruct and then not build again and just stop there? That's what Bojana's asking. That's what Bojana's wondering. Well, Serbia is smaller than Goa, I believe, but it still needs...
No, Goa is smaller at least.
Smaller. Okay, Goa is big. You need to organize 6 million people to live somehow together. You need some structure. You need some governance. You need some responsibility for the medical system and for the judicial system and for the roads and for the infrastructure and so on. So some kind of governments will be needed even after this government is deconstructed. And we know that in most cases, the next government will turn out to be, if not as bad in some ways. What was pushing people like Bojana to stand on the streets, to go out in the cold, to risk being beaten by the police, which is happening every day, was the faith that the country can be more just, that the human relations can be better than they are, that the institutions do not have to be as corrupt, as inefficient as they are now. So there's this hope, there's this faith. Maybe we don't have to translate this right into new forms of government and hire people just to fill the same positions that we have. Maybe what we need is something like what happened in South Africa after the fall of the apartheid. And that is to say, our country is now so divided that we would need some kind of a period of reconciliation, some kind of some kind of way of bringing us together. Families are divided, people are divided. Families cannot talk to each other, and family members cannot talk to each other because they have such diverse views on what is going on in a country. So maybe what happens after the deconstruction is not necessarily a rebuild right away, because we don't even know. We have to talk about what is happening and why did we come to that kind of situation, and what can we do to make sure, to the extent that we can, that it is possible to build a better society, a more just society. It is possible to avoid that much blatant corruption, that much blatant irresponsibility for the bad things that are done. Maybe what we need to do is really open ourselves and go together and try to be brothers and sisters and try to be good citizens and really see what are our common ideals. What is it that we hope our country would be for us and for the future generations that are coming? So it's not the mechanical deconstructing and building. The bulldozers come and bring it down, and then the cranes come and just put something up. We need much more than that. Our foundations are shaken. Our foundations are shaken. Our social foundations are shaken. We have lost the face of Serbia right now. We need something, a deeper national kind of dialogue and reconciliation that unfortunately most likely will not happen. But this is what we need. So yes, it's not that simple. Deconstruct and rebuild right away. This is what Descartes thought he can do, and his program did not quite succeed, right? We need to understand where we come from. What do we really value? What kind of people we want to be? What kind of society we really want to be? And I really hope that this crisis, so deep that it is, can bring some really, and create an opportunity for really smart people to get the chance to talk, to think aloud, to bleed together, because we all lose something in this process, and see how we can do it and whether we can do better job as a society, because Serbia, the past 40 years, has been one turmoil after another, one war after another, external, internal. This is not going anywhere. And just putting up another government would not solve any problem whatsoever. But let us not move away too much from the topic of the talk and see if there are some other questions.
Thank you.
So, Koshi has raised his hand. Please, so you can go ahead.
Thanks, Professor Predrag. It was a very illuminating talk. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. My response to your talk, requires a little further unpacking of the notion of truth that you have been talking about. Pardon me for bringing Gandhi here a bit, at least one reading of Gandhi, Bilgrami's reading of Gandhi that I have in mind. Akil Bilgrami, who must be your colleague in US also, he teaches in New York, Columbia University. So, what I find is that Bilgrami, when he understands Gandhi's notion of truth, he makes a claim that it is an experiential notion of truth that Gandhi is proclaiming, wherein he integrates it with the notion of nonviolence and ahimsa. So, I couldn't miss the parallel in your presentation when you talked about truth and love as the most, essential, so to say, ways to realize a flourishing life, human life. But my curiosity is whether you also incorporate a cognitive notion of truth within your concept of truth, or is it fully an experiential notion of truth? Why I ask this question, because somewhere in your presentation, I could also see that you still retain natural science as the basis from where we must, progress. So there is a hint there that somewhere we need to reconcile with the cognitive notion of truth. So I would like to hear a bit more from you about the notion of truth. Thank you.
Thank you for your good question. What I was talking about more in terms of preserving and using as a foundation was nature rather than natural science. I don't think that we abandon natural science. I don't think we turn against natural science. I think what's more important is that we recognize the limitations of the natural science. So let the natural scientists do their job, but let not they try to convince us that natural science takes the place of religion, that natural science can reveal to us what in the past religion used to reveal to us, and that there's nothing more to reveal but what natural science experiments with and deals with. The facts, the factual connections, causes and effects of things. I have nothing against natural science. I have against natural science becoming a religion, the ultimate criterion of truth. We need all kinds of help. One of the things that I was trying to do and that I was hoping to do with combining this concept of truth with the concept of love is maybe the idea that may not be strange to you. I think it's closer to an Asian way of thinking than a European, that we need something like a heart and mind to work together. I think in the West, we have separated emotions and thoughts too much. We have separated the brain and the heart. And somehow in natural sciences, we find the heart to be irrelevant, if even worse, the heart and the emotions to be an obstacle to our cognitive pursuit of truth. Remove the emotions, exclude the emotions. And I think that's an extremely damaging view of reality. Especially when we come to the problem of transcendence. I think when you come to the problem of values, how can you deal with values without emotions? How can you deal with values and transcendence without the heart? Remember how I was explaining the concept of transcendence, not the God above all gods that the Vedas or the Bible or whatever book you want proclaim, but what we feel as the most sacred. There's a story from India. I think Sri Aurobindo once told it, that the woman was coming to him and complaining to him, "Sir," she said, I am in trouble because I don't feel that I believe in God anymore." So Sri Aurobindo asked her, "How do you live? What do you do? How do you spend your life?" Well, she said, "You see, my sister and her husband died, and they left me this little nephew, 2-year-old baby, and pretty much all my life is concerned on providing for that little baby and giving love and nourishing that little baby." And Sri Aurobindo told her, "But you do have a God. It's that little boy. That's your God right now. You don't need the God in heaven. You don't need the God in a temple. A temple can be anywhere. Home can be a temple. Any place is a shrine. If you feel the right way, if you feel the right connection, if you feel that bond, it's not a natural bond. She's not the natural mother, but she has accepted the bond. And in some ways, it can be even stronger because she's not a natural mother, right? She's trying even harder to replace the natural mother to that boy and to worry about that boy. And that's not done cognitively. That's not because she signed any contract. That's not because the neighbors expect her to do it, but because she has this feeling from her heart. And so that she wants to give her life, if necessary, for the well-being of that baby. So several times in the talk, or maybe one of the most frequently used words that I mentioned is the word integrity, integrate, because we are divided creatures. Many times, and you've seen that, and I've seen that in India, and you know it more. You meet a medical doctor, and he doesn't think that he's a human being. He thinks he's a medical doctor, and that's above being a human being. Well, you're first of all a human being, and you have to be a human being, whether you're a medical doctor or doctor of philosophy or anything else in life, right? We are disintegrated. I'm not the money that I have. I'm not the title that I have. I'm not the diplomas that I have. I'm not the trophies that I have. I'm all of this. I'm myself in the good things that I do and the foolish things that I do, which we all do. Foolish, sometimes inexcusable, bad mistakes, bad misjudgments, and so on. How do you integrate that all? So there's this constant attempt to integrate what's in and what's out, what's good in me and what's bad in me. That's what I said at the end. Maybe the most difficult thing is to find the right measure between the real and the ideal, between the human and the unique. And that's not walking on solid earth, where you don't have to worry about yourself. It's more like walking on that tight rope. You know, these people who sometimes can walk, you suspend this rope between two buildings or two trees, and they have this pole. This is what our life is really like. Constantly in danger of falling, constantly in danger of doing something foolish or stupid, constantly in danger of overlooking somebody or something. And so easy to fall down, so much more easier to fall down than to balance, than to keep going and keep balancing and trying these different sides of our nature, the air and the earth and all of that. So that's my view. So I think I was emphasizing maybe emotions more because we have too much talk of the cognitive aspect of truth. I don't want to deny the cognitive aspect of truth. That's important. The truth is what it is. You have to find it out. You cannot sugarcoat it. You cannot lie about it. You have to find out what it is. Natural science is good about it, but sometimes they deceive us because they think all you can see and all you can measure is all there is. There's much more to reality than what you can measure. Much more than quantity, there's quality too.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for that response.
Thank you so much for the such clear answers, sir. If there are any more questions, you can directly contact the speaker through the email. The email of the speaker will be uploaded in the chat box. You can contact through that. Uh, I hand over the session back to Sagar. Sagar, please continue with it.
Thank you, Akash. To deliver the vote of thanks, may I please request Dipanki to come and proceed with the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sagar. Am I audible?
Yes, Dipanki, you are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, I warmly thank you all for being here today. First, our heartfelt thanks to Professor Predrag Cicovacki for sharing such an inspiring and thoughtful talk. A big thank you to Dean of SSPIS, Professor Kosi Tharakan, for the constant support and encouragement. I also thank all our faculty members, the research scholars of Goa University, and every participant, faculty, students, and guests from inside and outside Goa University for joining and making this event lively and meaningful. Special thanks to those who designed the poster and helped spread the word. Your efforts brought us all together. And finally, thanks to Diksha, who worked quietly behind the scene to make today's program run smoothly. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dipanki. Just before the wind up, just a quick announcement. The recording of this lecture will be available on our YouTube channel, that is Philosophy at Goa University. And we will be back soon with another guest lecture. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Once again, thanks, Professor Cicovacki. It was very illuminating talk. Nice to hear. Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope to meet most of you in person when I come to Goa.
Most welcome. Most welcome.
Professor, thank you.
Yes.
We'll meet soon in Goa. Thank you.
And special thanks to Dr. Ali also, Mohammed Ali, for